Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much for joining the Southwest Center for Human Relations Studies at the University of Oklahoma for this year's and this new season's installment of our monthly webinar series. I'm Asia Mukes, Communications and Project Manager, and we are excited about the 2019-2020 season of this series. Our hope is that we continue the conference's tradition of working to improve racial and ethnic relations on college campuses by providing virtual learning opportunities. Since August 2018, we've accumulated over 1,500 views on issues ranging from disability services to social media and race, all the way to identity formation. This season is sure to be amazing. We have a lineup of scholars who'll cover a wide range of issues, including immigration and DACA, institution reform and planning, and critical pedagogy. This season, we've introduced a new student track that focuses on ideas that speak directly to the experiences of students and is either facilitated or co-facilitated by a student. They're intended to identify emerging scholars and connect students to the NCORE community and to each other. Our student track webinars are always available at no cost. Make sure you're live posting. We want to know where you're watching. So tweet, Instagram, and Facebook pictures from your office with the hashtag NCORE and start the conversation online. You may end up in a very special NCORE video. Today we have Dr. Rahuldeep Gill. A native of the Boston area, Dr. Gill earned his bachelor's with honors from the University of Rochester in New York and doctorate from the University of California in Santa Barbara. Dr. Gill helped raise over $1 million as the past director for the Center for Equality and Justice at California Lutheran University. He's still a tenured faculty member and campus interfaith strategist at Cal Lutheran and is the visiting professor of Sikh Studies at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California. Today, he'll be discussing how diversity leaders can cultivate a spirit of resilience for the long haul. The center is grateful for Dr. Gill's expertise. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Gill.
Hey, thanks. All right, thanks, Asia. That was smooth. We've been practicing that for weeks. Hey, everybody. Welcome to LA. Welcome from LA. This is Rahuldeep Gill. Today we're talking about resilience. And it's not the kind of resilience that people talk about when they're talking about resilience these days. A lot of times people are talking about pull yourself up by your bootstraps as a resilient strategy. That's not what we're here for. Today on this webinar, you will not learn how to be more efficient. You will not learn how to be a better cog in the wheel of the higher education system. You will learn strategies and techniques and practices. And even if you don't learn them because you already know them, you will kind of get a sense of how important it is to deepen your praxis in the area of resilience. And we will talk a lot about community, because the way that resilience is talked about, in the larger public discourse, it's very much about a solitary human subject that is, subjected to all kinds of trauma, in the face of which she needs to be resilient. That's not what we're talking about here. But before we go any further, we need to do something special and important, and that is acknowledge the lands on which we sit. Even though we're coming at each other in the cloud somewhere, we're still sitting in certain places on this magnificent earth. And the places that we occupy there are the traditional homes of the indigenous peoples of what we now call North America. Without them, we wouldn't have had access to this gathering and to this dialogue. And so we take the opportunity here to thank the original caretakers of this land. Okay, with that, let's get started. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. That's me looking glamorous out into space in the streets of Los Angeles, where I live. I am, as Asia told you, professor of religion at California Lutheran University. I am affiliated with NCORE through Speak Out, Voices Changing Lives, who are basically my speaking agents. And we have an amazing roster of people who range from Angela Davis and Cornel West to schmucks like me, my sister Dr. Melina Abdullah at Cal State LA, person with Black Lives Matter, and a whole range of other speakers. And another thing about me is that I'm tired. I'm really tired, and the school year hasn't even started yet, and I'm tired. And the reason for being tired, right, it isn't just got to do with me. It doesn't just have to do with what's going on in my personal individual life. It has a lot to do with the context in which we all work. That is this global context, that is this national context with its political chaos that is going on right now. And it's a context in which higher education bears a certain kind of brunt of that political context in ways that I don't think the general public wants to understand and certainly will understand. But for people like you and I who are in the academy, we see the ways in which the world in which we live affects our daily lives. And actually, that's where this webinar comes from. It's actually my own fatigue. And so I put this together as a gift to my brothers and sisters in this larger community. But I remember about a couple of years ago, I had just come back from sabbatical. It was the fall of 2017. And I remember I didn't make it through October before I was like, something's different. Maybe it's just me coming back from sabbatical. Maybe, the year started with really hot weather here in Southern California, unbelievably hot weather. And that busted up the AC air conditioning system on our campus. And I remember we were having class outside in the sun in like 90-degree weather so that we didn't have to sit in the 100-degree, classroom because that's how bad it got. And that was like a weird, ominous beginning to the semester, because right around that time, another thing that happened was this, quote unquote, unite the right melee, right? Let's just call it, a grouping of American terrorists in a famous college town, an important college town of these United States, the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, right? And so that had a direct impact on higher ed. The event was built around an institution of higher education. And of course, it had huge impacts on our mental health, our spiritual health as practitioners in the space of higher education. God knows it affected our students, and it affected and it poisoned the atmosphere of those days. And we know what our supposed president said about the people who initiated a lot of that chaos. So, but then it was like a few weeks later, another political crisis emerges when the policy known as DACA is rescinded, right? And that affects higher ed communities in a massive, massive way. We are a university in Southern California. We are next to a major metropolis or a cosmopolitan place, and we have a lot of people from a lot of places in the world. And not all of them are documented, but there are students, and we love them. And that's what matters to us more than anything. But from a political perspective, from the perspective of the American state, their being was in question again, in a way that it actually always has been. So that was extremely painful. And then also being in Southern California, we were literally directly affected by the shooting. I think it's an act of terrorism, but whatever, in Las Vegas. You know, I had students who were at that concert, or who knew friends who were at that concert. Last academic year, some of those people were re-traumatized by another gun shooting at a country western event in the town in which the university is, Thousand Oaks, California. So it's just been, I don't have to tell you and I don't have to re-trigger you, but that whole time, it just felt like we've been running into fires, you know, over and over and over again. It doesn't seem like the summers are enough time to relax, or enough time to, you know, really prepare for the next year. And so that's why this webinar is, because I felt like I've been feeling like, you know, crap. I've been feeling really, really fatigued. I haven't been enjoying my praxis, which is my profession, as much as I used to. And I think there's a strong reason to think that there's a lot of people, you know, who are in that boat. And the fact that, you know, 500 people registered for this webinar kind of speaks to that, you know, quite a bit. So let's get into it, right? What does resilience really look like? Let me show you what the opposite of resilience looks like, according to the great United States monk, Thomas Merton, a Catholic hermit, who, in talking about the need for a more like supple spiritual life where resilience comes out of, takes a look at the people who are activists in the, you know, circles in which he runs in his lifetime in the mid-20th century, and he writes this about them. He says, to allow oneself to be carried away by a multitude of conflicting concerns, to surrender to too many demands, to commit oneself to too many projects, to want to help everyone in everything, is to succumb to violence, right? And that violence, you know, like I said, we're running into fires. We are running into and around constantly violent, at least rhetoric, if not behavior, in our careers and the work that we're doing. And it's not like we allow ourselves to be carried away by it. It feels like we're called to it. It feels like we have to do it. It feels like, if not us, then whom, right? And yet, I resonate with this, though, you know, that I am carried away by a multitude of conflicting concerns. I do surrender to too many demands. I do commit to too many projects, and I do want to help everyone and everything. And it does feel like I'm succumbing to violence. So who takes care of me? Who takes care of you? Again, this is the spirit out of which this webinar is being given. So one more poem, and that's going to set the tone for the webinar, and then we're going to get into the meat of it. Then we're going to get into the weeds, if you will. Let's talk about grass. This is a poem that was written 101 years ago by Carl Sandburg. And it was written, you know, at the end of the First Great War of Europe, when, you know, the Europeans renegotiated the Peace of Westphalia, or whatever you want to call it. And Sandburg, writing after that, writes about the resilience of the grass. And he says, pile the bodies high at Austerlitz and Waterloo, shovel them under and let me work. I am the grass, I cover all. And pile them high at Gettysburg and pile them high at Ypres and Verdun, shovel them under and let me work. 2 years, 10 years, and the passengers ask the conductor, what place is this? Where are we now? I am the grass, let me work. And that is the spirit in which today's lecture is structured. We are going to think in terms of the length of time it takes for living beings to actually be resilient, to actually grow. And the pace of that is the pace maybe of grass or other plants or other living beings around which you live, right? And it's sometimes we have to remind ourselves that we are living beings because we don't treat ourselves as gently as we treat our pets, our friends, our lovers. And so what we're going to do is we're going to think about, what does grass need to persist, right? To exist. And grass needs air. So we're going to breathe together in a few minutes. Grass needs the soil. And the soil is what we've prepared and what we are preparing in ourselves. Okay? We're going to seed our best intentions, and we're going to seek water for them. And I'm going to talk about how water, for me, is deeply associated with community. And then we're going to cultivate something. There's going to bear some fruit is going to be born, right? There's going to be dew. There's going to be sweet water that's produced as a result of this. And that's our self-trust. And throughout this, I want you to think of the self in its expanded sense, in the sense of what our ancestors knew it to be, which is penetrated by others, penetrated by the world in which it exists, not alone, not a single being. So with that, let's take some air in, okay? One thing before we breathe together, there are worksheets that were made available for this workshop. Some of you are sitting in rooms right now freaking out because you're like, there was a worksheet? Where is it? And then you're going to start checking your emails. Just relax. There are worksheets. Asia can get them to you again if you need them. You have my contact information here. You can email me if you need them, but they're in your inbox right now if you registered for this webinar, okay? You don't need them in front of you right now. If you have them, use them, great. If you don't, any piece of paper will do. And then what you can do is then go back, print the worksheet, and deepen the language of the webinar. Because this is what's up, folks. I'm not going to teach you all about this in an hour and 15 minutes. It's just not going to happen, right? You're going to need to practice this and go back to this and visit this, hopefully not alone, in community. So the worksheets will be a great tool for that. If you have it, great, use it. If you don't worry about it, all right? You're going to get to it at another time. So with that in mind, let's breathe. Just do that. Stretch your shoulders, open up your chest as you are able, and stop this hunching over that we're always doing. Hunching over that is the product of trauma. Hunching over that is exacerbated by our need for technology and screens, personal ones. And just notice yourself breathing. You can leave your eyes open. You can close them. You know, a lot of people have a meditative tradition with which they are familiar, to which they are biased. If you have one, great. If you're a Zen practitioner, you leave your eyes open. If you practice TM or the Vipassana tradition, you're probably got your eyes closed. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you're probably laughing right now. Just relax, just chill out, and notice yourself breathing. Why is it that so many of these meditation traditions focus on the breath? Is there something sacred about the breath? Is there something religious about all of this? Maybe, but maybe the breath is the one thing that is always there, that we can really notice, and that is always new, that we can really notice. Because everything around us is actually always new. But with every breath that we take in, we remember that we're alive. We remember that we are living beings made of food and air and water, from the energy of the sun, from this Mother Earth, living in this ether occupied by this oxygen. So let's just take 20 seconds to just breathe together in all these different places that we are. Just follow your breath. If you do have the worksheet, you will see that there's a lovely quote there from Thich Nhat Hanh about feelings and thoughts in relation to breathing. And that quote is, "Feelings come and go like clouds in a windy sky. Conscious breathing is my anchor." Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh. In a second, I'm going to go to Asia. Asia, why don't you bring up your screen and your microphone? And I'm going to ask you how that practice was for you. But just to give Asia some time to prepare herself and fix her glasses, I'm going to shout out the late, great Toni Morrison, who has her character say in the great novel, The Song of Solomon, as he's making a move to jump, she makes him think, if you surrendered to the air, you could ride it. And there's something about getting back to the breath that allows us to remember that that's all we need, and that we can ride the air. Asia, I heard that you just started a PhD program.
I did.
And how is your breathing these days?
Ragged.
Tell us about it.
It's just a shift in thinking. So moving from being full-time here to being part-time, and the daily grind is very different.
Absolutely. And there's probably a lot of people out there like that for whom higher ed is one part of their life, whether it's being a student or being a professional. They're also a parent, maybe a single parent, right? They're also, a student and a worker and a, caretaker. And so it's really awesome that you brought up who we are, and this professional or professionalizing aspect is just one part of it. And so I hope that when we breathe, we can remember all the things that we are. Yeah. How's your first week been?
Just a transition. Rough. Yeah. Just a transition.
And I think that never stops, right, in higher ed. And that higher ed is a series of transitions. Sometimes some of them feel the same over and over and over again, but each one is different, like the breath. And so just like the breath being a transition, we're living into a bunch of transitions. And so one of the things that the body needs is breath. But when we're talking about Mother Earth, when we're talking about the soil is the ground out of which literally all of what is going to bear fruit in our life is going to come, right? What is that soil? Maybe you can think about that soil as your body, or as your spirit, or as your emanation, the emanation of all the molecules working together with all these electrons. I don't know. I'm not a science guy, okay? I'm a religion professor. But Asia, come back on, because I'm going to ask you some questions about the soil. Like I said, soil is what we're preparing. So if you have the worksheet in front of you, you're going to you're going to see this as a list of questions that's in front of you. If you don't have the worksheet in front of you, you can just use the slide to fill in some things. We're going to take a few minutes to fill this part of the sheet out by ourselves. So the soil, I'm calling it the ground on which we stand. It's the ground of our being, right? It's the ground of where we're at. And a lot of things make up that soil, particularly the people in which we have relationships, particularly the people where, particularly the systems where we're able to contribute, where we're able to lead. Asia, you and I were having a conversation about mentorship. And when you looked at this question, you initially thought, oh, I didn't mentor anybody this past year, I mean, right? By this year, I mean, 2018, 2019. Tell me about that. What was your first thought?
That I haven't mentored anyone. I've been mentored, but I haven't mentored anyone.
Yeah. And then what did we kind of unpack about the word mentorship in a conversation related to that? Do you remember?
That mentorship was hierarchical. The word sometimes is inherently hierarchical, that there needs to be one person that's above and one person that's below.
In the typical use of the word, right? But we can expand mentorship, right? To mean something a little bit more casual, something a little bit more equitable, right? More of a horizontal relationship. And I was telling Asia that, we've been working on this project together to present this great webinar to y'all. And she's been mentoring me in how to do a good job on this for weeks, right? Any success that this program has is all, due to Asia and her team. And anything that screws up is totally my fault. But that said, Asia, do you see something different about mentorship when we talk about, well, that was an act of mentorship? What does it feel different?
That it doesn't have to be that all the relationships that I have then kind of change focus. So that it doesn't necessarily need to be me being over someone or me being above someone, that I can seek out these sort of reciprocal learning opportunities from everyone around me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that higher ed feels more like a hive, right? Than a bunch of siloed offices. And when I mean hive, I mean something with a buzz, right? Something where people are doing things and talking to one another. Unfortunately, we've given to this, really patriarchal notion of what higher ed should be like, and it looks a lot like business, right? It looks hella neoliberal. But then you can add on to who were the people that you were mentored by. What were some of the programs and initiatives where you chipped in? Asia, you talked a lot about the programs and initiatives where you chipped in for NCORE last year, right? And you all have made big strides in the kinds of programming that you're able to offer throughout the rest of the year. What was your role in that?
I was responsible for doing some expansion projects for NCORE and some stuff that came out of the center, not necessarily NCORE. So I was mentored by a few people.
Yeah. But then you contributed, you probably took the lead on things. In those times, right, there were probably moments when you felt that you were really operating at capacity, like you really felt good about the work that you were doing, right? Mm-hmm. In those moments, what do you remember about it? Were they collaborative moments? Did you feel a particular kind of relaxation? Did you feel...
In the moments where someone was mentoring me?
No, when you felt best in that work. So we're on to one of the questions at the bottom of towards the middle of the bottom of the page. When did you feel best in that work?
Yeah, it's when you feel like you're contributing and you see your contribution grow and take shape and hold.
Absolutely. Excellent. And there's also times when you probably feel stretched in those moments when you don't see the stuff coming out in front of you. In those moments, I want folks out there to think about what are the resources that they bring, right, to that. I'm talking about spiritual, indigenous, traditional, or mindfulness resources. And if you don't have a list of these that you can really come up with, maybe, you know, it's time where you sat down and asked somebody who you think is, you know, really good at that, what kind of things that they do. And
Dr. Gill, we have a question
yeah.
from the group. So someone asks, is there a better word for mentorship? That this person was just having a conversation with someone about how the word mentorship turns people off.
Yes, I think the word itself is a little bit of a trap based on how it's used. So if there's a better word for you, then definitely use it. I suspect that mentorship is actually like 10 different words, you know, and some of it is, you know, people who just have some access to something that you could really utilize or would develop you professionally in some way or spiritually in some way. I think friendships are mentorships, right? And I would hope that folks have, you know, a working space where they can, you know, create larger relationships outside of work. But yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the different kinds of relationships that could stand in for mentorship in just a few minutes. But that's a really, really important point. And thank you for bringing up questions. Do we have any others while we're here? Or
no, that's the only question we have. So
okay. And I'm glad that person asked it. And what's the best way to ask the question? Is it through the chat box?
The best way to ask questions is to use the Q&A box. That way we can keep track of it. We have quite a few people in the session and we don't want you to lose your question by it scrolling up in the chat box.
Yeah.
We do have one other question. What is, quote, traditional resource defined as?
So something that comes from your heritage or something that comes from your religious tradition or your spiritual tradition, or something that you learned about mindfulness, or that's something that you borrow from another tradition, right? Consciously knowing that you're borrowing it and being grateful for it. So that's what I mean, right? A breathing technique could be a traditional resource. Yoga could be a traditional resource. Having sacred time with your family, right? There's religious traditions that totally shut down for one day of the week to spend with family. I think that's a resource that people can lean on, right? To build resilience and things like that. So, yeah, what I am talking about is, more broadly speaking, self-care, right? Your resilience is, quote unquote, your resilience is, you can't separate it from the care that you give to yourself. And that care is physical. It could be as basic as getting the requisite sleep for your particular body, right? There are some bodies out there who can get away with the 6 hours a night. This one is not one of them, right? It needs the 9. I know. It I gotta make up for it in other ways, but I'm not fully me if I don't, right, get my sleep, or exercise or nutrition, right? The emotional self-care, spiritual self-care, and having partners for accountability in this self-care for yourself. One thing that's, you know, become really important to me as I professionalized is mental health and emotional health. And I don't think people out there still talk about it enough. I think there's an incredible amount of stigma, right? As somebody who suffers with mental illness, I will say that, you know, making sure that I know where I can go for the kind of support that I need for myself, including a therapist, right? Including a partner who, you know, checks in on me, including friends and my furry friends, right? Taking stock of all those things is going to be really, really important. And in a few minutes, we're going to actually list out where some of those things are. We're going to get more and more specific as the webinar continues. But before we do, Asia, how are we doing on questions, or does this bring up anything for you?
We had a comment. what I want to do is I want for us to save some of the questions for the end.
Sounds good.
So that we can have a really rich discussion after the presentation.
Awesome. I wanted to bring up something that came up in one of my classes that I was teaching, and it was a class for young men of color, first generation college students, or young men who were low income students who were identified for this program, in which we met for a seminar to kind of mentor each other and just to have a space to be together in this predominantly white institution in which I work. And I asked the men about, their self-care practices, thinking that they were all going to talk about how tough they were and, how their dads taught them just to, suck it up and self-care wasn't really a part of their lives like it had been for me at that age. But they were telling me about freezing masks and all kinds of stuff. And I'm like, these guys shop at Sephora, like they are way ahead of me. I think maybe the next generation is going to be set on this issue from the, small sample size of students that I had. But ever since then, I'm like, I got to take care of my whatever, part of my face you can see. I need to get myself a mask. So sometimes you learn about, these practices from your own students, and they mentor you in that. Okay. One thing that I think that we don't do enough of is keep track. We talk a lot about self-care, but it slips. It's a slippery thing because we forget how much we're actually contributing to the work that we're doing. So one aspect of cultivating your soil, right, to get back to the metaphor, is to keep reminders to yourself that you are contributing a heck of a lot in the work that you're doing. And so literally what I would say is, write up a requisition from your department, if you have the budget, and demand that they buy you a cork board with some pins and put this up in places where, in a place in your office, in a physical space in your office. I'm not talking about your stickies on your desktop. I'm saying a real space. And on this corkboard, make sure that as you receive them, you put up the thank you notes from students that you get. You put up the flyers from the programs that you helped sponsor. My corkboard has drawings for my kids on there, right? To remind me of what really matters to myself. Sometimes I write notes to myself up there, or images of what success looks like for me. And for me, that's an image of the Dalai Lama at a podium. And there's a little me in the back somewhere. And I was at a conference and the Dalai Lama spoke and somebody took a picture. And I put that up there as something that I want to remind myself of when I think of success. I also have, scripture up there or heritage items. Any reminder that I have of what I do and that it's important, I put up on this corkboard, and I call it my wins board. This is an idea that I borrowed from another academic who told me about this, who mentored me on this. And so, there's, you can start writing down what you would put on your wins board. Which of these things do you have? What else would you put on there? Maybe, a quote from someone like Toni Morrison, right? Or a person who's been important in your life, okay? Another beautiful quote from Thich Nhat Hanh talking about the soil is that, the soil is messy, right? And the soil is the thing out of which beautiful things come. And, in a really simple way, in 4 words, he has this beautiful saying, no mud, no lotus. Right? The lotus is a thing that transcends, that rises above the muddy water, but it's deeply rooted in that at the same time, right? It's literally drawing upon the richness of the mess in its daily praxis. So if we have good soil, what can we do? We would seed our intentions, right? What do I mean by that? I'm not talking about seeding your intentions for doing the best program, right? I'm not talking about seeding your intentions of teaching the best class in 2019 and 2020, right? I'm talking about your intentions for yourself. Asia, when you started this program, did you take time to sit down and to really think about what you wanted to accomplish for yourself this academic year?
No, I didn't. Of course not. But
Yeah.
I did give myself space, right? So I gave myself enough time to create the space necessary to bring that into my life. Does it make sense? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. Were you ever deliberate with writing down some of the things that emerged from that space?
No.
I mean, you don't have to, right? But do you think it might assist you? And let's say like November comes around and papers are beginning to be due.
I think that being intentional always has a space.
Yeah.
And so whether or not you recognize what needs intentionality is a whole other question, right?
Thank you. That's somebody told me that the institution in which I work at are, people are well intentioned but lack intentionality. And so that's what we're trying to avoid, and that's what we're trying to drive into right now. And it's a part of self-care, actually. Self-care isn't just the products you can buy on Amazon and the gift card you get for getting a facial or something, right? Self-care requires being intentional. And Audre Lorde, in her famous quote, is saying that caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. The more I think about that quote, the more I sit with it, and the more I think about what people like Audre Lorde were up against in their lives and what we're continue to be up against in our own, right? Self-care is a kind of guerrilla warfare, and it requires a certain kind of intentionality. So, Asia, we're going to do this on the fly. You took some space to do this work, but you didn't write it down. So let's practice writing it down. I want you to close your eyes for a second and think back to a time when you feel that there was a really great balance between your work life and your spiritual life and all the things that you were part of, right? What did it feel like? What sounds were there? Do you remember a time like that?
Yes.
And what does it feel like? You don't have to tell us a lot about that time in particular, but what does it feel like to think back on that time?
It felt balanced, relaxed.
So
are the only two words that come to mind right now.
Those are massive words, right? So if you had a worksheet, or if you were going to go back to your worksheet later, I would say, if I was Asia, that I felt 100, right? Operating on full capacity or just feeling 100 when I was balanced and relaxed, right? And writing that down today and putting it maybe on your wins board so that you can remember it in November when, right, stuff really begins to hit the fan is going to be important. What does it take to get to balance for you and relaxation? What does it require?
It requires the opposite, right? To be unbalanced and to not be relaxed. To recognize that is what I need.
How so?
I think when you are in a space that is uncomfortable and not enjoyable, do you want to feel the opposite?
I see. I totally love that. And that's exactly why I want you to be intentional about this, right? And to write it down, because when you're in that moment of not enjoying, right, you've got to remember that there was an outside of that. And that falls apart really quickly. But at the same time, it is always within us to kind of get back there, right? And so for me, it falls apart especially when I feel like I feel dehumanized for some reason, whether it's because I'm being worked too hard or because something like a microaggression or just straight up aggression, right? Based on some identity group to which I belong, emerges, right? In the workplace, in the news cycle or something like that, right? And so for you, am I hearing that to get back to being balanced and relaxed kind of requires some controlling of your time? Does it require some planning, or like, how do you get back?
It's a decision generally. I think people, it just, there's a line by which you make the decision that you don't want to be like this anymore.
Got it. Got it. And in that moment, do you feel that it's kind of easy to just to decide that and then feel more balanced or relaxed, or is there some practices that you have to do or some space that you got to take?
Yeah, there's space and practices. So I go to the gym and I sleep and I cook and these things that make me feel balanced and focused.
And for me, it's actually being out in nature. So I live around some really great hiking trails, and I don't know if sometimes you can hear my dog barking in the backyard, but he's like my best friend, and we go out on these trails and we just get sort of immersed back in nature. Exercise happens out there for me. I get different kinds of, different quality of air in my lungs, right? And I feel like I can get back. Writing down how you get back, right, is kind of like leaving a trail for yourself in the woods, so that you can get back to where you need to go, where you came from when you were lost, right? I thought of popcorn, but that's not a good thing to leave in the woods. Hansel and Gretel messed that one up. That didn't end well for them. So how you get back should not be popcorn. So onto the next level. Let's think about ourselves not just as individuals in this struggle, right? In this struggle for balance, in this struggle for relaxation, in the struggle for getting back to operating at the capacity at which we can and want to operate. We cannot go it alone, right? And for me, the metaphor of water, we've talked about air, we've talked about soil, we've seeded our intentions in the soil. Now we've got to water, right? For me, water is about community, because where I come from in South Asia, and this isn't an image from somewhere in India that I got off the web, about a village well. Those women are looking into that dark hole because they're extracting water out of the earth from that place. And they do so together in this communal environment. And so that's why the watering hole, right, is a place of community, is a place where people gather to refresh themselves, not just individually through water, but through contact with other human beings. So I told you that self-care wasn't just going to be about you. Self-care means getting really, really intentional and really, really clear about what your needs are, who you go to get certain needs met, and what you can offer in reciprocity, not for any individual person, but just what your offerings are for the universe, for the world. And so what I've done here is on the worksheet that you're going to see in just a second, right here, I've actually put out a bunch of columns. So if you have the worksheet now, you can use those columns. If you don't, you can go back to that. You can just kind of understand what I'm asking you, what I'm asking of you. But what I'm asking of you is not to be this lonely sunflower out here in the desert, okay? You want to be well watered. You want to be around other people who make you feel alive. You want to be around people who have particular things that can help you live the kind of life that you want. And that's what I mean when I say, who are your peeps? Who are your people? If you're a higher ed professional, I was just thinking about what are some things that higher ed professionals need to do. A lot of them, are implementing other people's ideas, and some of us are coming up with some of our own ideas to add on to those ideas. We are participating in programs. when we have those ideas, we're at the idea stage. Who do you go to challenge your idea or to clarify it, right? So let's say there's a new webinar series that Asia wants to put together, and it's kind of, she's freed herself to think a little bit off the cuff, bounce ideas off the wall. Who does she go to help you clarify or challenge her ideas, improve them? Once she gets to the logistics stage, who does she go to get things done? Before that even happens, with whom does she dream? And as she's doing this, who are her ride or die people? Who are people who give her unconditional emotional support? Let's ask her. Asia, which of these 4 categories that we've named so far are easiest to kind of think about people and write names down when you think about who would you go to when you needed somebody to?
Probably logistics planning and how to get it done.
Yeah. And so what kind of goes into what, professionals do you have to hit up to put a webinar like this on?
I think the whole Southwest Center staff, folks that put on NCORE, clearly are really good at logistics and planning and how to get things done. So. Right.
And you have a tech person who's specialized in there. We have Matthew today, who's doing a great job as a captioner, right? So there's people who kind of can lead you to those people, help you hire those people, or who are already in place to do that, to help you, do your job better, right? What about some of the other stuff, challenging your ideas or dreaming? Do you ever dream in community?
Community in the sense of.
That's the question. And now you can think about
university setting. So like in higher education, or do I have a community of people outside of this space there's communities of folks that I have on both sides, both professionally and personally, that I can do all those things.
Right. Awesome. So writing down some of those names will be important for down the road if you get stuck and you need to remember who you go to. But another reason why it's important to write down some of these names is to look at where the holes are on your piece of paper, right? Where you can't think of people that you go to help you challenge your ideas. And then you might want to think more creatively of, well, who could I go to if I wanted that, right? So there's sort of rallying your peeps. Another thing that anybody needs to know in any kind of field is, what is the cutting edge? So in higher ed, right, we have journals, we have blogs, we have a chronicle and all the things that, it has under its disposal electronically and in paper and in print and all that. We have professional development opportunities like NCORE, like webinars, like other conferences, like institutes that are sometimes put on in the summer. And, there's opportunities for networking. I hope you have a good network, Asia, of places that you go to be in the cutting edge, but you're also, a first year doctoral student. So you are in the process of building this list. Isn't that right? Like, you did a master's in your master's program. Where did you see the sort of, the cutting edge? Where did you go to find out like what's popping out there? Like what is happening in higher ed?
Actually NCORE.
Yeah.
Yeah. NCORE is absolutely the place to be on the cutting edge of diversity and equity and inclusion work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And for me, NCORE wasn't on my radar, I would say more than 5 years ago. Right. It took somebody telling me, and then 2 persons telling me, and 3 persons telling me, hey, you should check out this thing NCORE. You should check out this thing NCORE. You should check out this thing NCORE, right? And I think not only using the opportunities that you have, but listening out for people in your networks to see where can you go, what institutions, what institutes, what conferences can push you in places that you want to develop. And I think being intentional about these things and actually going out and finding people who help you do that, that's part of building a strategy for resilience. That's part of how we have to professionalize in this really sort of high intensity, fast paced world of higher education when the news cycle is constantly hitting us. NCORE is a place I go not just to learn, but just to relax and be myself and to be, a higher ed professional of color who was working on social justice issues, which I don't have in my predominantly white institution, right? And so it's a really, really important place to be for a lot of reasons. I have a couple other places like that, but I realized that one of the conferences that I used to go to, I no longer go to anymore because I don't feel that anymore. What I didn't do yet is be intentional about what am I going to replace that with? Do I just want to leave that space in the calendar open for just rest and relaxation? Or do I need something as a 10th year professor to get me to whatever next level or that I want in my particular life, right? Is there a conference like that? I've got to sit down and think about that.
So this is a good spot to bring up one of the comments that was made.
Thank you.
This is not so much a question as a thought. Some of these points are difficult to do well or grasp because they are not measurable in the business world. We are led to measure everything we do. And so I admit to feeling a bit lost reading these, wondering how to incorporate them successfully at work, where only measurable outcomes are considered gold.
Yeah, I really, really, really appreciate that, yeah. Right? Two things. One, qualitative measurement matters too, right? I think when we think about measurement, we're often thinking about quantitative results, right? But if you change the way that you think about, assessing what you're practicing, then there's some space there for wiggle room to articulate this, right? Secondly, sometimes I think it's okay to turn off the measurement instruments. Because what I'm talking about here, yes, I want you to be really, really successful in your professional life. But remember that for me, you are a human being first, right? You are like the grass. You are that vulnerable. You are that fragile. And I think we've got to be more in control of the narrative of what we are producing without necessarily having to rely on productivity to produce more. Like I said, this is not about being more efficient, right? The measurable outcomes from some of these things could mean that you increased your network of supporters, right? You increased the people with whom you are in conversation with. Some of these things, some of these conferences that I go to, I am representing my institution, right? And I'm representing my institution in a setting to help people understand what we're doing better. So sometimes helping the institution articulate that just for some people showing up in these spaces is really, really important, right? I mean, I know people who are in places where they have to really work hard to articulate why it's important to even show up at a thing like NCORE, right? Why can't you go to that other conference, right? So I think one of the things that I'm trying to say here is that it's really important for us to see ourselves as human beings first, as parts of nature first, and then through the relaxation and balance that you spoke of that comes with that, maybe to be a little bit more clever in how we frame things in relation to what we need in look, let me put it a different way. In times like this, in dumpster fires in history, like the one that we're living through right now, the Amazon is literally burning, right? Police brutality, storms, like you name it, right? Deep racism in our society, transphobia. I mean, what our students need sometimes is the space and resilience to deal with this trauma. So one of the things that I think people can do is articulate outcomes in terms of the needs in this particular moment, right? This is not like it was 10 years ago. This is not like it was 20 years ago. Something has shifted. And I think being able to articulate one's needs in that context is extremely, extremely important. I hope that helped that person. If not, I would love to continue that conversation in the question and answer. Does that sound good to you, Asia, or should we proceed?
No, I think if we're going to give out contact information, you all have my contact information. So if there is a separate conversation that we want to have, then we can do that offline. Erica has another question. She says she has difficulty with using the term self-care because it comes from a very white privileged notion about the care that is individualistic. I usually prefer to use mindfulness rituals or collective care through radical self-love. Why do you choose to use self-care if it comes from a predominantly white culture? Just wondering.
Well, just because I'm a flawed individual and I'm still learning, so I like the last one that you said, radical. What was it?
It was collective care through radical self-love.
Collective care through radical self-love. Yeah, I think that's dope. I think that's beautiful. If I could find a two-syllable phrase for that, maybe I'd use it. If not, I'd learn how to say that. Okay, so. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm deeply, deeply colonized. I'm a flawed human being, and I'm still trying to work through these things myself. When I say self, I'm coming from a South Asian tradition in which lots of religious traditions, like the Buddhist tradition, have thought about the self as, like I said, interpenetrating. So when I said self, I sort of was already thinking about another way of thinking it, but I will be more attentive to my language use and think about what's the best way to do that. And this next slide that you're going to see about the sweet fruits of self-trust, this is kind of speaking to what exactly you're talking about, Erica, because for me, self-trust cannot happen alone. So for me, self-trust is about our commitments to ourselves, but also our commitment to our community, right? There is no subject, there is no individual self that is apart from the context in which that self is functioning. It's just not possible. That's why racism sucks. That's why, misogyny is horrible, right? Because it cuts us off from our context and makes us hyper visible as only certain things. We are so much more complex than that. And that's why I love this phrase from the Aboriginal activist Lilla Watson. I love these words. If you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together, right? I was listening to a scholar's interview the other day, and he was talking about, and I'm actually going to quote his book in a few minutes, so I'll tell you exactly who he is in a few minutes. He was talking about, the grounds on which solidarity is built, right? And the grounds on which solidarity is built, according to Fred Moten, is realizing, hey, brother, this shit is fucked up for you in ways that it's also fucked up for me. That solidarity is built on understanding the self in relation to others and understanding others' sufferings in relation to one's own. So for me, being very, very articulate and very, very precise about the commitments that we have, not just to ourselves, is really, really important. So I am asking you today to think about, as you're progressing into this new school year, into this new academic year, what are you committing to so that you can blank for your community? And if the word community needs to be pluralized, do that. If the pronoun my needs to be pluralized, do that. Our communities. But what I'm trying to say is you can't go it alone. And so you've got to be ready to ask for something. What is that thing that you're going to be asking for? So for me, one of the things that I commit to this academic year is taking better care of my body so that I can be a better advocate for my community. I'm working on a series of translations. I'm a scholar of religion, and these translations have never been available in a popular book in the United States. They come from my community. I want that out there, but I can't do that if I don't take deep, deep care of my body, because as a translator, I've got to get into the being of another poet, right? You can't do that as a removed subject. When I can't go it for alone, I will ask for a timeout so that me and the person in my life who resets me can sit down and just breathe together, and that is my partner. Asia, do you have anything that you're thinking about now that you think about this in relation to the larger community that you feel that you're representing? What do you commit to in this academic year so that you can blank for your community?
That's probably something I have to sit down and think about a little bit. I have to give that some thought.
Awesome. I think you should. Do you think that would be fruitful for you? Can you see how that could be helpful?
Yeah, if we're talking about intentionality, thinking about what you are committing to and what you'll do and what communities are most salient for you, that's something I think that you have to be really intentional about.
And it goes back to that point about, wanting to do everything for everybody, right? And sometimes you've got to make really, really tough decisions to focus on your own self-care, right? And this brings us back to actually where we started. I want to take you back through that poem, The Grass, and remind you that this all takes time, right? This academic year is going to be challenging. We know this, right? You are not alone, and it's going to take time. It's going to take time for you to plant the seed. It's going to take time for you for the soil to get rich. You might want to come back to this again at the beginning of next semester, because this poem was written 101 years ago, right? I'm not going to reread it. I'm just going to reference it. This poem was written 101 years ago. Think about these battles. Think about where this space is today. Think about the grass that covers that space. And in doing so, think about what kind of ancestor are you becoming? Because that's the pace at which all of this works, right? That's the big longue durée that we were sent here. We have launched into this career in our lives because of people who made it possible for us. And the pace of this work is that slow. It's just that because everything feels like it's coming at us so much more faster these days, it just feels like that we're never enough. And if nothing else, that's what I want you to walk away with out of this webinar, folks, is that you are enough, you are not alone, and some slow work. Some slow work. I don't want to leave you just like that, though. I want to leave you with some resources that have been important in my life in helping me learn this stuff. I didn't just kind of come up with this. Like, people have been mentoring me for decades, right, in learning this. I offer this sort of freely because I offer it as a gift, because I know the times that we live in sort of demand more of this. But I got it from other folks, right? So my friend Riyadh and his partner Kim and A run a really, really amazing website called Being Lazy Slowing Down. And if you go to lazyslowdown.com, they have a blog that is sort of their gift to the universe. Riyadh's a really important thinker out of Michigan State University School of Education, and sort of he has this kind of decolonial way of looking at the world. And so Being Lazy Slowing Down is something that I would ask you to direct yourself to. Also, the work of somebody who's kind of super en fuego right now, right? Adrienne Marie Brown is amazing work. Emergent strategy is a way of thinking about pursuing these, about framing the social justice trajectory of our lives through this concept of emergence that is very much in tune with nature. You see a flock of birds on her cover. There's a reason for that. I would ask you to think about and read some of her work. Pleasure activism for me was mind-blowing. The politics of feeling good, we need that. in our day. And you can follow her on Instagram as well. She's dope. Adrienne Marie Brown. We need more people writing this kind of stuff out there, and she's on a vanguard. As a professor and as somebody who's interested in critical theory, something that has really begun to shift the way that I think about the academy has been this book called The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Fred Moten, who I've referred to before, talking about solidarity, and his friend Stefano Harney. It's actually available online. You can purchase it, but you can also download the PDF because it comes out of an anarchist press. And so part of their business model is to, if you love this stuff and you can pay for it, then pay for it, okay? Other than that, I am really excited for questions. I really appreciate, the 500 people who showed up and the hundreds of people, so the 500 people who registered and the hundreds of people who showed up and the hundreds of people who are going to watch this, thanks to Asia's great work. And we're going to be able to watch it on YouTube. So thank you, everybody. I hope we have a good discussion from here on in.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gill. We did have someone respond to Robert B. Around the business practices. How do you implement this in business? And so the comment is, building practices or resilience is a personal effort. Once we lean in as individuals, then we can work collectively with our colleagues to create a more balanced environment.
I would say the opposite might also be true, right? In that we can collaborate with our colleagues to learn how to lean in better, to learn how to lean into ourselves better. But it requires, right, being around different types of people, and it requires being humble and being able to learn from each other. But I respect the spirit of that comment.
Also, Ali says, taking care of oneself is crucial because we, in particular, as people of color, specifically Black women, are taught to take care of others in community, and we're selfish if we take care of self. So we need to push back on that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons myself as an Asian male wanted to step up and say this, because I learned this stuff from Black women, right? If you look at the people who I find most motivating in my life in the politics, it's the radical Black tradition, and it's so influenced by women and femmes, and it's just absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So my question for you is the idea behind the webinar was, how do you create a spirit of resiliency for the long haul of diversity work? And so my question to you is, where are you in your resilience using what you teach others?
That's a really great question. That's a really, really important question. I will tell you that I am on medical leave this semester from my home institution, because it's that bad, right? Like it's that bad. My home institution tries. We were profiled in the Chronicle a few years ago. There's a huge picture of me talking about diversity and inclusion, but it's a dumpster fire right now out there in the world. And I was on the receiving end of some threatening paraphernalia that was left inside my office, and it really messed me up. And I had to step out and be like, I can't do this. And so where I'm at is taking care of myself and trying to tell others that, fuck the business case, right? We are the people on the backs of whom this business runs. And it's not a production line. It can't be like an assembly line. It's not that kind of work. And we're not just going to be cogs in the wheel. And so I'm really appreciative that you asked that question. I try to give you the most honest answer that I could. And that is, I'm struggling to take care of myself. But what I'm learning is that when things get tough, the people that you can rely on, it becomes really, really, really clear as to where in those grids that I have on those workshops, like where the deep safety is. And I still need to keep relations with, my department chair, my dean, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah.
So B. Woodard had a question. Are you there, B. Woodard? If you want to ask a question, if you can use the chat box, that would be great. Meg Chang said that they're so glad that you bring together spirit and social justice. They teach MBSR and it needs this badly. I'm not sure I know what MBSR is. Do you?
I probably do, but it's in a file that I can't access right now. I'm not sure. It sounds exciting though.
So I just want to go back to your point about not being a cog in the wheel. And so how do you, with wanting to help everyone and wanting to take on all these projects in an institution that needs someone to help lots of folks who are unsupported, you know, how do you balance not being the cog that keeps this business running and also being supportive of a population that needs support?
I'll give two answers for that. The first comes from a great mentor of mine who I hope a lot of people on the chat are familiar with. Her name is Carrie Ann Rockamore, and she is the CEO of the Center for Faculty Development and Diversity. And Carrie Ann has a teaching that says, not all no's are created equal, right? Or something like that. I forgot. I remembered it and then I forgot I was talking about it. Which is to say, saying no to some people is way harder than saying no to other people. And saying no to my student, right, directly, that's probably the last no that I could ever say, right, to a student, right, who's asking me something in particular. How I respond, though, matters, right? Do I take on their issue all onto myself, or do I go through my list of people who are my mentors, people who are in my network, people who I can turn to and say, let me walk you over to so-and-so's office. That's the best thing I can do right now. I've walked so many students over in the last 10 years that I've taught. Actually, before that in grad school, man, some real traumatic cases, walked them over to mental health offices because I needed care right there. Sometimes I walk them over to multicultural services or something, right? So you can do a warm handoff, but some no's are harder than others. And the second thing I'll say is to double down on that in-person piece, right? Anything that I can do in person, in a room with another human, right, to like help them, that is going to matter so much more than me sending emails and being sort of removed from the action. Because for me, the greatest resistance to this neoliberal wave that we're seeing in the academy is to double down on humanity. It's to double down on being in rooms with a lot of different people, you know, being together, eating together, joking together. I think that's the real work of education that happens. And that's from that book, The Undercommons, and I hope people read it. I read it 5 times in a month because it hit me right when I needed it. But that's how I resist that. What other questions do we have?
So we have an anonymous attendee who says, best of luck to you during your time off. You have my understanding. I have experienced emotional violence in the workplace and it is exhausting. Any suggestions on how one can engage in emotional self-care in an emotionally violent workplace environment? I'm asking about strategies specific to those used in the workplace rather than those used outside of the workplace.
I can't give the HR answer. Like, I mean, I have a really good HR person, right? But like, I think taking things to HR is like the best way, or the ombuds person or whatever, like start escalating certain things and continually documenting. Like something happened to me, you know, a year and a half ago where I thought a situation was really sketchy, and I documented it, and it came out being really, really important. So I just sent an email to myself, so it time stamped when I sent it. So documenting things, that's something I learned as an RA, actually, as a resident advisor in higher ed, which is, when something happens, just really document it like you were a third person observing it rather than in your emotional tones. That has really helped. Now, that's a kind of defensive strategy, honestly. For me, and I have a lot of privilege, first as a man, second as a tenured professor. For me, staying away as much as possible from the university right now is really, really important. But if I had to be there, really picking where I was going to be. I'm going to have my office moved when I get back. So I think the most important thing is your actual physical body and your space. And when like this person said, there's emotional violence, it affects your body. And so articulating, your office needs, your space needs, you really need to self-articulate, for that. But again, the only way to do that is with others. So that's why it's really important for me that people fill out that form where, who are your people that you go to? Where is your unconditional emotional support? Who's going to walk with you over to HR? Luckily I had a couple people like that, and without them, I would be in a much worse place.
So this is more of a comment. This is Dr. Gill. I think many of us feel as you do, especially when at a PWI. And I really am grateful that you're sharing your truth and story. It's important to name the toxicity and violence we're living in and how this seeps into our spaces, consciousness, and bodies as we begin another academic year. We're holding so much for so many while attempting to retain hope and retain ourselves in the process.
And, like I said, women of color, Black women in particular, have been doing this in this country for decades. I mean, centuries. What am I saying? And so it hurts certain bodies more than others. And that's why it's important for me to step up and step into this space. And more I see, more men, more people with privilege doing that. And that's really heartening to me. So I'm with that person who said that. Thank you.
And the last comment is, thank you for sharing your own challenges as you fight to be resilient. Honored to witness your graceful struggle. We actually just got another question. As power dynamics exist between students and faculty, staff, and in a workplace where faculty staff are often overburdened, how can students advocate for themselves and get access to the resources they need and the mentorship and reciprocal learning from faculty staff? I'm thinking specifically in the aftermath of tragedies and violence like the mass shootings. How can they work collaboratively together without the work being placed on the shoulders of faculty staff? That's a really good question.
I think that's a great question because students are always in the position to have the most say. The reason is that in this neoliberal context, in this capitalist context, the students are the customers, right? And any corporation needs its customers. And when its customers are unhappy, it causes some tension, even if the checks are already cashed, right? And so I think more and more students need to be taking over academic affairs offices and president's offices and student unions, I think they need to work across as diverse coalitions as they can find, right? We have in our political context is that it's a really hard place to build coalitions right now. I don't think we need permanent coalitions among students, right? Like I don't think everybody who's on the left-hand side needs to be together for all things at all times. But I think if there's something on campus that affects people and that is, like Fred Milton says, it's fucked up for you and it's fucked up for me, so let's get together. I think one way to do it is let's just look at how expensive meals are on campus for students, right? Students need to advocate for better contracts with the Sodexos, the Aramarks, and these other massive corporations that also feed jails, right? That are also prison food makers. I think they need to advocate for better options for, hungry students. Every campus should have a program for being able to feed its student body, right, as its customers. So yeah, more power to that person who wants to put the onus on students to do it. I'm with the students, but unfortunately I've been burnt out by leading for students. Not only burnt out, but it just wasn't my place sometimes. And I think faculty, what their roles are is to sometimes be more humble, right? And to make partnerships with staffs, folks. I mean, I'm talking to myself here. Like I need to be a better coworker and stop being a prima donna in relation to well, I have a PhD or I have tenure. Oh, that stuff doesn't matter, man. That's just how they keep us from being more collaborative with each other.
We don't have any more questions, and we have 5 minutes left. I want to say thank you very much for agreeing to do this first webinar. The first is always the hardest.
Hey.
But we hope that you have enjoyed your experience doing our webinar, and we hope that all of our participants have enjoyed this experience as well. You can go to www.ncore.ou.edu and take a look at all of the other webinars that are being offered this season. We have a really great lineup, and we look forward to hosting you. Thank you again, Dr. Hill. Do you have any closing comments?
It's been great working with you, Asia. I'm really thinking about all the participants out there. I'm really praying for a better year. You know, but I'm also out there with you in solidarity. Any help that I can be, please don't hesitate to ask. If I can send you, you know, these slides or whatever y'all need. I'm in solidarity with folks out there.
Someone asked me to repeat the website. I just typed it into the chat box, but it's www.ncore.ou.edu. Okay, well, thank you very much and have a wonderful day.